General Hank Iron Gut Reynolds sat in the Pentagon's secure communications room, staring at the holographic message beaming from the center of the table. Across from him, a fleet of ominous-looking alien warships hovered above Earth's orbit, casting dramatic shadows over the Pacific. The message, a grandiose declaration of inevitable planetary subjugation, was being delivered by a 12-foot-tall, armor-clad, four-eyed alien with the kind of booming voice that suggested he spent his free time narrating intergalactic movie trailers. "Earthlings," the alien intoned. "I am High Overlord Krelzok of the Glorvac Dominion. Your planet has been deemed unworthy of independence. Surrender immediately or—" General Reynolds, halfway through a cheeseburger, held up a single finger, signaling the alien to pause. He chewed methodically, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and took a long, deliberate sip from his oversized coffee mug, which read, "World's Okayest General." Then finally he leaned forward and pressed the transmit button. "Yeah, nah, we're good." Silence. The kind of stunned cosmic silence that only comes when an intergalactic warlord expecting groveling submission is instead met with casual dismissal. Krelzok blinked his 4 reptilian eyes. "You decline?" His voice faltered slightly, as if this possibility had never been considered. "Yup." "Hard pass," Reynolds said, stretching his back with a wince. "Listen, buddy. I've got a busy schedule. You're blocking our satellite. Football broadcasts, which is already a war crime in some parts of Texas. So if you could move your ugly space RV out of our orbit, that'd be great." Krelzok's face contorted in alien confusion. "Do you not comprehend the gravity of your situation? We command a fleet of 10,000 warships, each equipped with weapons capable of reducing your civilization to dust in mere minutes." Reynolds took another bite of his cheeseburger. "That's adorable. A lesser species might have cowered. The United Nations might have debated. Diplomats might have panicked, and civilians might have taken to the streets screaming. But the U.S. Army had been dealing with existential crises for decades, and their response to terror was generally a mix of caffeine, sarcasm, and unnecessary explosions. At that moment, Sergeant Bill Bam Bam Johnson poked his head into the room. "Hey, sir, I overheard something about an alien invasion. Do we get hazard pay for this?" "Doubtful," Reynolds grunted. "But you do get bragging rights." Bam Bam grinned. "Nice." Back on the alien mothership, Krelzok turned to his command staff, who were also struggling to process what had just transpired. Admiral Zeroth, his second-in-command, finally broke the silence. Did the human just refuse to be conquered?" "Yes," Krelzok said, his voice hollow. Admiral Zeroth cleared his throat. "So, do we blast them out of existence then?" Krelzok hesitated. Something about the human's tone unnerved him. He had seen defiant species before. Those who fought bravely, those who bargained, those who pleaded. But these humans? They acted like they wanted him to try. He narrowed his eyes. "No. We gather intelligence first. I want to know everything about these creatures." Back on Earth, Reynolds tossed his empty coffee cup into the trash and turned to Dr. Emily Carter, his top cultural warfare specialist. "Doc, you think we can mess with them?" Dr. Carter grinned. "Sir, I think we can make them regret ever contacting us." And so, humanity's defense strategy began, not with missiles, not with diplomacy, but with psychological warfare of the most absurd kind. The first strike? Flooding the alien communication network with military drill instructor speeches, cat, memes, and an unholy amount of Jersey Shore reruns. The battle for Earth had begun, and the aliens had absolutely no idea what they were in for. High Overlord Krelzok had conquered dozens of worlds in his time. He had seen entire civilizations fall to their knees before the might of the Glorvac Dominion. He had broken the wills of warrior species, shattered planetary defenses, and forced empires to grovel for mercy. Never, not once, Had a species responded to an invasion threat with a cheeseburger and sarcasm? And now his bridge was in chaos. High Overlord, we are receiving an overwhelming amount of transmissions from Earth, Admiral Zeroth reported, his voice barely containing the panic that was spreading through the command deck. Their response appears to be non-traditional. Krell-Zok turned sharply. Have they surrendered? The Admiral gulped. No, sir. They have sent us pictures of small, furry quadrupeds sitting in boxes. Krell-Zok's 4 reptilian eyes blinked in unison. What? I believe they refer to them as cats, Zeroth continued, nervously flipping through his holopad. Some of the images are labeled LOL cats. Many contain captions written in grammatically incorrect Galactic standard. Krell-Zok grabbed the holopad and stared at one of the images. A fluffy white feline sat in a tiny cardboard box with the words, "If it fits, I sits." His mandibles clenched. Is this a threat? We don't know, Zeroth admitted. But there are thousands of these. Along with... He hesitated, taking a breath before continuing. An alarming number of short, nonsensical video transmissions. They feature humans performing bizarre rituals, such as consuming inedible objects, dancing in chaotic fashion, and engaging in what appears to be self-inflicted harm for entertainment. Krell-Zok scrolled to a video. A human stared at the camera, then stuffed an entire ghost pepper into his mouth, his face instantly contorting into agony. Through choked screams, the human managed to blurt, "This was a bad idea. I regret nothing," before collapsing to the ground. Krell-Zok turned back to his officers. Are they testing their pain tolerance? We believe it is a form of ritualistic dominance display, Zeroth said grimly. Another officer stepped forward, pale with worry. Sir, we have also intercepted an Earth visual transmission labeled Fear Factor. The bridge crew fell silent as the recording played. Humans were willingly consuming insects, enduring extreme heights, and subjecting themselves to unimaginable terrors, all for a trivial amount of currency. Krell-Zok felt his exoskeleton tighten in horror. They eat poison for fun? The officer nodded. And engage in reckless, near-fatal activities purely for entertainment. Krell-Zok turned to his war strategist, Captain Vorkul. What is your assessment? Vorkul swallowed hard. I believe we have vastly underestimated the psychological fortitude of this species. If they are willing to inflict suffering upon themselves for amusement, then their pain tolerance must be beyond anything we have encountered. A nervous murmur spread through the bridge. Krell-Zok clenched his mandibles. I want more intelligence. What is their military capability? Zeroth sighed. That's another problem, sir. Their military communications are confusing. He played a transmission from a U.S. Army training exercise. You think you're tough, Private? I'm your worst nightmare. I will break you down and turn you into a war machine. Krell-Zok recoiled as the camera zoomed in on a red-faced, vein-popping drill sergeant screaming directly into the face of a human recruit. The recruit, instead of showing fear, simply grinned and shouted, Sir, yes, sir. Another clip played, soldiers running for miles in full gear, laughing as they carried absurdly heavy weights. Then another, a group of humans voluntarily jumping out of a perfectly functional aircraft with nothing but fabric strapped to their backs. Krell-Zok stared at the footage in stunned silence. Zeroth hesitated before showing one final clip. Sir, this one is particularly troubling. The transmission flickered, revealing a video labeled U.S. Marine punches alligator in face. A human in full combat gear stood waist-deep in a swamp. Suddenly, a massive reptilian beast lunged at him. Without hesitation, the Marine decked the creature across the snout, sending it thrashing away. The video cut back to the Marine wiping his knuckles. Shouldn't have tried me, buddy, he muttered before walking off screen. Krell-Zok slumped into his command throne. His voice cracked. I need to sit down. The bridge officers all exchanged worried glances. The High Overlord buried his face in his claws. We assumed they were primitive. We assumed they were weak. He lifted his head, eyes wide with revelation. But they are chaos. They are unstable. And worst of all, they enjoy it. He stood abruptly. No, I refuse to believe that an entire species can be this reckless. They must have some form of structured leadership. Who is their ruler? Zeroth pulled up an image. According to their communications, this individual holds significant power. Krelzok leaned in. On the screen was a picture of a man with oddly styled yellow hair standing in front of a podium, gesturing wildly while making an exaggerated facial expression. A caption read, "Former US President, once tried to buy Greenland." Krelzok backed away in shock. Their leaders try to purchase landmasses? Zeroth nodded. They appear to treat diplomacy like a high-stakes game of chance. Krelzok was breathing heavily now. This is worse than I feared. They are not bound by logic. They do not fear destruction. They treat war as entertainment. They treat suffering as sport. He turned to his officers, voice shaking. We cannot conquer these creatures, not by force. Admiral Zeroth hesitated. Then, what do we do, my lord? Krelzok inhaled deeply, trying to suppress the rising sense of existential dread clawing at his mind. We gather more intelligence, he said at last, though his voice lacked confidence. We must observe their culture, understand them before we make any rash decisions. Zeroth hesitated. And how do you propose we do that, sir? Krelzok's mandibles clicked in frustration. We must view their historical archives, learn about their ways, their behaviors. He turned to his chief data officer. Find the most influential and widely consumed pieces of media in their culture. Within seconds, an enormous database of Earth's most popular television shows and movies was projected in front of them. Krelzok scanned the list. His eyes landed on the first selection. A title flickered across the screen. Jersey Shore. The High Overlord steeled himself. Begin playback. And so the Glorvak Dominion's first deep dive into human civilization began. And by the time it was over, they would never be the same again. By the time the Glorvak Dominion's intelligence officers finished watching the entirety of Jersey Shore, the ship's medical bay was filled with alien personnel suffering from extreme psychological distress. High Overlord Krelzok stood at the head of the command bridge, his mandibles clicking with growing unease as his officers trembled before him. Admiral Zeroth, looking particularly frazzled, wiped sweat from his brow with a shaking hand. My lord, he stammered. I don't even know where to begin. Krelzok sighed and folded his arms. Start from the beginning, Admiral. What did you learn from this? He checked his holopad, still struggling to pronounce it correctly. Jersey Shore? Zeroth took a deep, ragged breath. Sir, these creatures willingly consume alcohol in vast quantities, then purposefully seek out physical combat with one another, often for no discernible reason. They seem to form temporary alliances, but betray each other constantly, sometimes within minutes. Their mating rituals appear to be elaborate yet completely chaotic, fueled by competition, deception, and, he shuddered, dubious amounts of spray tan. Krelzok narrowed his eyes. And what conclusions have you drawn? Zeroth's eye twitched violently. My lord, these creatures thrive in conflict. They generate drama purely for entertainment. Their social structure is a constant, ever-shifting battlefield with no clear rules. Even when they are not at war, they manufacture their own wars within their social groups, simply to stave off boredom. A nervous silence filled the bridge. Krelzok exhaled slowly. What else have we gathered? His chief data officer, Lieutenant Vrelka, hesitantly stepped forward, holding a report that was shaking in her hands. Sir, we have also completed our analysis of human historical warfare archives. Krelzok motioned for her to continue. Proceed. Vrelka swallowed hard. We intercepted numerous transmissions featuring a visual document labeled Independence Day. Krelzok perked up. Ah, a historical record of their battle tactics. Yes, Vrelka nodded. At first, the footage depicted what we expected, an alien fleet overwhelming human forces. But then, she hesitated, her voice almost failing her. The humans used a primitive flying machine piloted by a drunken individual to destroy an entire capital warship by flying directly into it. The bridge officers collectively gasped. Suicidal warfare tactics, Krelzok whispered in horror. Vrelka nodded solemnly. And the most concerning part? The humans celebrated it. She took a shaky breath. Sir, I am beginning to believe that these creatures do not fear death. Krelzok turned to the main viewing screen, staring out at the distant blue planet. Surely that must be an anomaly. Not all of their historical records could be so reckless. Vrelka hesitated. Sir, we also intercepted another archive, a visual document labeled Top Gun. Krelzok narrowed his eyes. Explain. Vrelka nervously adjusted her uniform. In it, their elite fighter pilots repeatedly engaged in reckless aerial stunts at high speeds, with no apparent tactical advantage, simply for entertainment. They appear to view combat not as a calculated necessity, but as some sort of adrenaline-fueled sport. Krelzok's mandibles twitched. And what else? The data officer took a deep breath. The film ended with one of their pilots doing a celebratory high-speed pass over his own command vessel, just to be obnoxious. A wave of horrified muttering spread across the command deck. Krelzok sat down heavily in his throne. He had expected Earth to be technologically primitive. He had expected them to be militarily inferior. He had not expected them to be completely and utterly insane. A voice crackled over the bridge's intercom, pulling him from his thoughts. My lord, we have intercepted yet another broadcast. This one appears to be an active signal. It is labeled Monday Night Raw. Krelzok straightened. A live military training exercise? Zeroth frowned at his holopad. Uncertain. The data indicates it is a form of simulated combat. However, it is performed in front of a large civilian audience. Krelzok's eyes narrowed. Show me. The screen flickered to life. The bridge crew collectively gasped. Two enormous human warriors, covered in oil, wearing garish costumes, stood in a giant metal square, engaging in what appeared to be ceremonial combat. They were screaming at each other in exaggerated threats, flexing their muscles, and slamming each other into the ground. The crowd surrounding them was roaring in delight. One of the humans suddenly grabbed a steel chair and bludgeoned his opponent over the head with it. The opponent then stood back up completely unfazed. Krelzok shot to his feet. They train their civilians for hand-to-hand combat. Vrelka's hands were shaking as she analyzed the footage. Sir, we believe this is a form of public's entertainment. The audience is cheering for these warriors. Krelzok clutched the arms of his throne. His breathing was uneven. They have trained their population to enjoy violence. Silence gripped the bridge, and then another interruption. A communications officer turned from his console, his face drained of all color. My lord, he whispered, we are receiving a transmission from the humans. Krelzok steadied himself. On screen, the bridge fell completely silent. The screen flickered, and then a single man appeared. General Hank Reynolds. He was grinning. Hey there, ugly. He leaned forward in his chair, taking a long, slow sip from an extra-large cup labeled gas station coffee, 64 ounces. Krelzok's exoskeleton tightened. What do you want, human? Reynolds smirked. Oh, I just wanted to check in on you guys. See if you were enjoying our educational materials. He gestured vaguely toward the screen. That's good stuff, huh? WWE? Top Gun? Maybe a little Jersey Shore? We put together a nice little introductory package for you. Krelzok felt his fists clench. You're mocking us. Mocking? Reynolds gasped theatrically. Oh no, never. I'm just saying, you guys could try to invade, but his grin widened. Have you really thought that through? Krelzok stared at him. He saw the confidence, the arrogance, and worst of all, the complete and total lack of fear. Krelzok's blood ran cold. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, propping his feet up on his desk. So, what's it gonna be, pal? You sure you want to pick a fight with the species that punches alligators, eats ghost peppers for fun, and voluntarily signs up for military service in a country where the training literally starts with a guy? Yelling at you until you cry? He sipped his coffee. Because personally, I think that sounds like a terrible idea. Krelzok slowly turned to his officers. I believe we need to reconsider our approach. The command bridge of the Glorvac mothership was silent. Not the disciplined, strategic silence of a warship preparing for battle, but the dead, exhausted quiet of a crew that had stared too long into the abyss, and had the abyss stare back at them, eating a cheeseburger while watching Jersey Shore. High Overlord Krelzok sat in his throne, his mandibles clicking nervously as he replayed General Hank Reynolds' last words in his mind. Have you really thought this through? No, he had not. He had expected Earth to crumble at the mere sight of his warships. He had expected their leaders to kneel, their armies to scatter, their civilians to beg. Instead, he had found a species so reckless, so deranged, so suicidally overconfident that the very concept of invasion now felt less like an act of conquest and more like an incredibly bad investment. And now they were calling his bluff. My lord, Admiral Zeroth spoke up hesitantly, his eyes darting between his trembling officers. Our forces await your command. Krelzok exhaled sharply. He could feel his credibility slipping away. The Glorvac Dominion had never retreated from an invasion. Ever. And yet, he had no idea what would happen if he ordered an attack. Would the humans retaliate? Would they launch their own counter-assault? Would they do something even worse, like laugh at him? His claws tapped the armrest of his throne. No, the Dominion could not afford to be humiliated. Not like this. He needed an exit strategy, one that didn't involve looking like a coward. His mind raced. There had to be a way to withdraw while saving face. And then, an idea struck him. A desperate, unorthodox, completely undignified idea. He stood abruptly. Prepare a diplomatic transmission, he ordered. The officers exchanged puzzled glances. Sir, Krelzok clenched his fists. We will negotiate. The bridge crew visibly winced at the word. Glorvac did not negotiate. Glorvac conquered. Glorvac demanded tribute. Glorvac enslaved lesser species and absorbed their cultures into its own. And yet here they were, forced to come to the bargaining table because humans were too unpredictable to invade. As the diplomatic transmission was prepared, Krelzok tried to salvage what little dignity remained. He could spin this. He could make it seem like he was in control. A few minutes later, the screen flickered on, and there was General Reynolds. He was wearing aviator sunglasses and sipping an unreasonably large soda through a straw. Well, 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 Reynolds grinned. You finally ready to chat, tough guy? Krelzok straightened, trying to regain some semblance of authority. Earthling, after extensive analysis, the Glorvac Dominion has determined that invading your planet would not be a productive endeavor. We have, therefore, decided to— Reynolds held up a finger. Let me stop you right there. Krelzok's mandibles twitched. Excuse me. Reynolds leaned forward, removing his sunglasses. See, what you're doing right now is trying to make it sound like you're making the decision to leave, when in reality, we both know we scared the absolute hell out of you. Muffled snickers broke out on the Glorvac command bridge. Krelzok bristled. That is absurd, he hissed. We are a dominant intergalactic empire. Yeah, Reynolds waved him off. Super scary. Big bad warships. Listen, pal, let's just cut the nonsense and— Get down to business. Krelzok narrowed his eyes. Business? Reynolds grinned. You guys came here expecting an easy takeover, right? Now you realize you're in over your heads. So let's be realistic. Instead of war, let's talk trade. The bridge officers exchanged stunned looks. Krelzok's eyes narrowed. Trade? Reynolds leaned back, gesturing around. We got plenty to offer. I know you guys have been watching our broadcasts. You're hooked, aren't you? Silence. Krelzok's face twitched. We are not, Reynolds smirked. You watched Jersey Shore all the way through, didn't you? Krelzok gritted his teeth. Reynolds let the silence drag. It's okay, man, he continued. Admitting it is the first step. Listen, you can leave with nothing, or we can make a deal. Krelzok hesitated. What kind of deal? Reynolds grinned. Simple. You stop trying to invade us, and we let you license our entertainment. Krelzok blinked. You mean you would share these chaotic visual records with us? Reynolds leaned in. Buddy, you haven't even scratched the surface. You've seen Jersey Shore, sure, but we got more. A nearby officer whispered, There's more? Reynolds nodded. Oh yeah. We got Survivor, Fear Factor, Keeping Up with the Kardashians. Hell, I haven't even mentioned The Bachelor. You ever seen grown humans fight over one romantic partner? It's basically civil war in a mansion. Krelzok's claws twitched. And this is entertainment to your species? Reynolds smirked. It's addictive. A long silence stretched over the bridge. Krelzok looked at his officers. They were already considering it. A trade deal meant they could withdraw without losing face. It meant they could pretend they never really intended to conquer Earth, that this whole invasion was a business opportunity all along. Krelzok exhaled sharply. Very well, human. We will agree to this arrangement. Reynolds grinned. Smart move. We'll send over an initial licensing package for the first batch of shows. You're going to want to start with Florida Man, the documentary. That one's a real eye-opener. Krelzok sighed. We shall formalize the agreement. Reynolds raised his soda. Pleasure doing business, partner. With that, the transmission ended. Krelzok turned to his bridge crew. Prepare the fleet for withdrawal, he muttered. Zeroth hesitated. Sir, is this a defeat? Krelzok took a deep breath. No, he said firmly. It is a strategic pivot. And so the Treaty of Yeah, We're Good was signed. The Glorvak Dominion officially recognized Earth as a high-risk, do-not-engage species. And in return, Earth licensed its entertainment to the Glorvak homeworld. Several months later, an intercepted Glorvak transmission revealed a shocking development. The entire empire had descended into chaos over a heated debate about which Kardashian was the most powerful. Krelzok sat in his throne, watching a marathon of The Bachelor, and whispered, What have we done? And that, as they say, was the day the Glorvak Dominion surrendered to reality television.